I study whatever adversity we're going through. So I studied the eye of the storm, and that is the calmest place within any storm. It's the calmest, quietest place. And I had read in the SESH book that this woman had said someone at a Nar-Anon meeting recommended she draw a circle around her feet. And remember, that's what you have to always come back to. You can affect and influence to a point what's outside that circle. Not to a controlling point, but to affect and influence. But you always have to come back to what's inside that circle, and that's what you have to work on, and that's all you can control.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SHAIR Podcast. Today we have Annie Highwater joining us. And Annie is the author of Unhooked, a mother's story of unhitching from the roller coaster of her son's addiction. It's her memoir, where she goes into details about what it was like as the mother of a drug addict and all of the coping skills, boundaries, limits that she had to embrace, adopt, learn, and all the resources she had to enlist to finally get to a point where she could separate herself from the addiction, because she herself realized quickly that she too needed recovery. This is a great episode for the loved ones that suffer on the sidelines watching their wife, their husband, their sons, their daughters struggling with the disease of addiction. So let's dive into Annie's story. But first, as we get closer to the 100th episode, I would like to invite our listeners to please go to the website and leave us a message on the right-hand corner of the webpage. If you go to www.theshairpodcast.com, on the right-hand side, you'll see a red button that says Leave a Voicemail. Click on that button, and a little box will pop up that says Start Recording. What I would love is to hear feedback from our listeners. The SHAIR Podcast has so many listeners, and some of you have been here almost from the beginning. I'd love to know the impact that SHAIR has had in your life. I'd like to know your favorite episodes or anything else you feel compelled to share about the show, and I'm going to air each one of those recordings on the 100th episode. I would love for all of you to be a part of it. So again, please go to the website, www.theshairpodcast.com. Remember to spell SHAIR, SHAIR. Click on the red button to your right where it says Leave a Message, and tell us the impact SHAIR has had in your life, your favorite episode, or anything else you'd like to tell me, so we can air it on episode 100. But first, if you would like to know the best way to show your support for the SHAIR Podcast, here are a few ways you can help. First, go to www.theshairpodcast.com, and there you can sign up for our free newsletter, which will let you know every time a new episode of the SHAIR Podcast comes out. You can leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. If you would like to know other places that you can listen to the SHAIR Podcast, you can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. If you would like to donate to the SHAIR Podcast, you can do so via PayPal, or you can support us on Patreon. We have a thriving Facebook group that grows daily and has massive participation. Again, it's a private group, so if you would like to discuss recovery, share your experience, strength, and hope, help others, or lean on others for support, be sure to join the Facebook private group. And all of this information can be found on the website. So go to the website, and there you will find all the information that you need to help support the show. So now a quick message from our sponsors, and on to the show. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. Hey, Annie, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on the show today. How are you feeling?
Feeling great.
Wonderful. I love it. All right. So folks, today we have Annie Highwater joining us on the SHAIR Podcast. And Annie is the author of Unhooked, a mother's story of unhitching from the roller coaster of her son's addiction. This memoir follows the experiences of one mother who started her own life in a neglected home and came to realize how those experiences both helped and hindered the hardest, most heartbreaking, yet illuminating changes of her life. That sound about right, Annie?
That's right.
All right. Excellent. So let's dive right in. So first, Annie, take us into your normal daily routine, including recovery.
Well, I tend to be a little obsessive with wellness, so I get up extra early and follow a ritual every day of, I like to start the day kind of setting intentions and meditating or prayer or whatever, and I have a lemon water that I prepare with, and I like to take vitamins and do certain things just to begin my day healthy and positive.
And do you have a routine, like a recovery routine that you follow in Nar-Anon or Al-Anon? I'm not too familiar with some of these codependent type programs. So tell us a little bit about that.
I do go to Nar-Anon, and I don't know that I have a routine so much as I just kind of turn to it as needed. And I guess that would be part of my meditation in the morning, and I have some daily readings and things like that.
One of the questions that I like to ask is how you maintain your spiritual condition, the practices that you actually do in the mornings.
That would be the setting of intentions. I like to spend about 20 minutes meditating, and then I walk my dog every morning. It's kind of our routine, and around this, it's about a half-mile circle. I kind of give thanks for the day and pray for protection for people that I care about and set a positive mindset and kind of start the day with gratitude and peace and being positive and counting on it being a productive day. And then I come back in and I work from home. So I prepare myself as if I'm going into an office that way on a really positive note.
I like that. You know, one of the reasons why I probe a little bit and ask the question is because some of us, especially in early recovery, have no idea what a morning routine looks like, what a spiritual routine looks like. So the more detail you get, some people can actually, you know, they'll either resonate with it or it'll be something like, wow, I never even thought about doing something like that. Or I didn't know that walking my dog out in the woods could be like a spiritual, you know, experience. And for many cases, the outdoors is absolutely where they connect spiritually.
Well, yeah, and it takes you outside of your surroundings. And I do that all throughout the day. I have this thing I call the 90-second rule, and I apply it when stress seems to surge. If I have kind of an unruly client or somebody with a demand or rude and I'm sensitive to that, I will take my dog out and just pull away long enough to kind of go through my thoughts and my ritual and then come back in and then address it and then begin my day. Because I used to just hit the ground running, or if I was dealing with one of those moments and it had me surging at kind of 80% and above adrenaline, I would just go with it. And now I try to be more mindful and intentional about those things.
Beautiful. Yeah. See, that's what I'm looking for here. You know,
yeah.
Actionable tips and rituals that people practice to prevent them from conflict, confrontation, you know, starting the day off wrong.
Definitely, yeah.
The list is long.
Right.
So as far as recovering addicts is concerned, we typically have a clean date and an anniversary date. Do you have an anniversary date or a clean date for Nar-Anon?
No, not so much, but my son had gone to California into treatment about 3 years ago. It's been a little over 3 years. And I didn't realize until he was there about a year that I was in recovery too. That kind of dawns on you later. I'd heard somebody in a meeting say, when you start going to those support groups, it's like walking into a theater in the middle of a movie and it doesn't really make sense, but then it swings back around and it just finally clicks. So that kind of happened for me about a year after he had been out there. So I don't really have a sobriety date, but I do say that I relapse with him from time to time, and that can trigger me to paranoia and the fear and torment and kind of playing scenarios out in my mind if I see things that remind me of stuff we'd gone through. And sometimes if I let it go too far and I don't pull away and kind of calm myself down, if I get to the point where I'm investigating, I know I'm relapsing down the rabbit hole and I'm in trouble. So I'm about a month clean from that because I do return to it sometimes. But I don't, it doesn't go as deep. It doesn't last as long. And I typically catch it a lot more to where it would just have me off to the races.
Right. Okay. So tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write this book.
Well, basically my decision, I've written a couple of articles about our story, And it spawned from that. But my decision to write it was because when we were going through it, it all began about 8 or 9 years ago. I really didn't have anyone to talk to. I felt really isolated. I felt really alone, and you feel ashamed because of, there's stigma, and then it's, this is my child, and I didn't have a lot of peers to turn to or people in our social realm, so I had to go outside that and I talked to a pharmacist pretty frequently and a police officer I knew that was informed, and people who were experts in the field, what I call the experts, which would be addicts themselves or family members. I had to seek those out, and I didn't really have anybody guiding me what to do or not do. So I wanted to write my experience of what worked and what absolutely did not work or serve me well. So I kind of wrote it for that reason. I wrote it for what I didn't have, kind of what I was looking for. And all the knowledge I gained, I had a stack of journals that I wrote everything I learned in those. So I just put it all together, and I wanted to kind of create a textbook experience that's definitions and guidance along with our true story.
Great. And there is definitely a need for that. I know that doing the SHAIR podcast as long as I have, you're one of the mothers that has reached out to me because there is that need for the loved one, the parent, the mother, the sister, the girlfriend, the person that is not the addict, but dealing with the addict. What are some of the things that I can do? What are the things that I can avoid? What kind of support can I seek or look for? Because it's not as accessible as for the addicts and alcoholics. For us, it's just a matter of Googling, and within a minute or so, we've got, a bombardment of information and meetings
and help at your fingertips.
Yes.
Right.
So there is definitely a need for this type of help. So in that case, let's just turn this show over to you now, Annie. Tell us your story, the story of your son, and what led up to you finding your own recovery, him going into recovery, the battle you had when you found out he was on drugs, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and ultimately your journey of recovery up until today.
Right. Well, I come from a background of what I like to call it, that there's a French term, folie à deux, which means the madness of many, which I was sort of born into this huge family that they were all struggling. So I came up out of that, not really having a lot of communication about it, but just aware that the struggle was going on. So you become hypersensitive to who has the power in the room or who's miserable or what that might be about. So I began to study my circumstances, my surroundings, and human behavior. And when I got to a school age, I started studying those in textbooks and in libraries. So I developed this obsession with psychology and behavior just because for the virtue of what was going on in my home. So I come up out of that. And then by the time all of that rolled around full circle with my son, I was somewhat prepared to pay attention to the changes in him. So basically, my mother was in a car accident when I was 12 or 13 years old, and she was I call it prescribed addiction because it's basically handing somebody an addiction if they are going to struggle with a dependency.
Correct.
She had issues with pills in her background and a lot of depression and nervous problems, and that had been a central struggle in my childhood. So by the time she was 12, or I was 12, she'd had this car accident and had severe injuries, and she's been on prescribed medication for that ever since. For 30 years, she's never been off of her pain medication. So that takes a toll on a family, that takes a toll on your mentality, and she had been my struggle for years. So when my son was about 17 years old, he had a jaw injury in football, and he'd had a surgeon prescribe Percocets, which are really powerful. And it wasn't a lot of discussion out in the community or the culture about normal seeming families with prescription issues. But I knew that it was our struggle. We were a church going family, but my mom had this problem. So I told this doctor, I don't think it's a good idea that he be prescribed this prescription, but he said he needed it. And, he was professional and I wasn't. And I explained the struggle in my family and what I thought it could lead to. But he just kind of talked over me and talked me into it. My son and I had an argument about it, and I ended up allowing him to fill the prescription. And then it was a couple months later, he'd had dental work done and had Vicodin prescribed. And then took about 30 days before it became a dependency. And we were just off and running from there.
How old was he at that time?
17. He was a senior in high school.
Okay. So by 17, he's taking Percocet and Vicodin.
Yes, they were prescribed.
Now, your mom for 30 years has she been taking the same medication?
A lot of them.
Oh, so multiple types of what? Are they like pain medication?
Yeah, a lot of pain medication. So a lot of surgeries, a lot of arthritis, a lot of things like that. And there's a severe dependency. So that's been a part of her life, and I don't see that changing. Yeah, and he'd never really been a party or anything like that. I mean, he'd gotten in trouble and been ornery, and that's all in the book, too, that he had tried to go to a teen nightclub, and I was pretty strict about all of that because the family I came from, and we didn't want him to be wild. So I pursued him pretty staunchly when he would try to go left or right. So we didn't really have too many problems. He was really into sports. He had gone to private school. He was classically trained on piano. He was pretty popular and well-liked. He's got a very, very charming personality. I always say he's like letting a puppy loose in a room. Everybody just enjoys his company. He really is one that lights up a room, and people talk about him later. Like, they would say, I met your son, and he's just so friendly, the most polite kid ever. So we'd really never had serious problems with him before this happened. So then once the prescription took hold, it was a complete night and day difference. In fact, his name is Elliot in the book, and we called his evil twin when he was actively using El Nino, which describes kind of like the storm that would hit, because it's a totally different personality. It brings a darkness. So
for how many years was he using?
We struggled with this for about 6 years, and it was really a learning process, because the first time he'd gone into rehab, I remember thinking, okay, problem solved. We got him here. And a relapse never occurred to me. But, we'd gone around and around and gone through these cycles, and he would be in my home and then his dad's and a friend's, and then he would do well and we'd have hope, and then it would bottom out. And that went on over and over and over for a good 6 years. Just the traumatizing cycle of it.
So,
as it got worse every time.
Okay. So then from 17 to 23, basically.
Yeah.
All right. So how old was he the first time he went into rehab?
He was 18. It was after he had graduated.
Okay.
We had a really bad summer, and he was back and forth and between my house and my mom's. And my mom was his enabler, and I was codependent in the sense that I was completely at the mercy of his well-being. Just so consumed by it that it makes you nuts when you're a parent caught up in that. I just absolutely went insane and climbed the walls and was a detective and into all of his social media to follow him. And we had months and months and months of that. And then he finally had my mom call me and tell me he admitted his addiction, which is, obvious anyway.
Right.
And he wanted to get into treatment. So that was his first stint in treatment, was in late 2009.
Okay. So then for that first year, is he using the Vicodin, the Percocets? How's he getting it? So there's this whole story, and I'm sure part of it is part of the book I'm trying to get out of you here. So,
I'm learning talkative. Sorry about that. Okay, yes. So sometimes he would get pills from my mom, and sometimes I would have to get into his social media and find who he was getting them from, and then I would call that person and every family member they had, and I'd run background checks and go to their door. I mean, I was crazy.
This is good. This is good. Yeah, this is what we want here.
Okay, he went and got them sometimes from a really bad neighborhood that had boarded up houses, and I would sit in my car and watch him. I had like binoculars, and this is embarrassing, ridiculous, but it's what you do when you're a mom. So I'd watch him walk up on the porch, and he'd have really nice clothes on and, purchase whatever. And then I'd go up on the porch after him, after he would pull away, and I would, I knew I had to have a strategy, and I couldn't threaten physical harm, or they wouldn't even care if I said, I'm going to have the police here, because they don't care. So I would say, I'm from the media, and I'm going to have, Channel 6 here in your front yard, and I'll have a tent out front. Or I've got, I would just threaten to have some kind of exposure, because that's the only thing they don't want and that they're going to be afraid of is exposure. So then a couple times I would vomit beside my car and then drive to work just sick. And then he would call me and say, don't go do this anymore. Stop going around my friends. And I knew they'd called him and said, don't come back. So that was kind of like a victory to me. But I always say today, no one should ever do that. I should have never done any of that. Even if it was somewhat effective, I would never advise anyone do that.
Why?
Well, because that was dangerous and it didn't solve it. And he just got better at doing it and getting it and hiding it from me. It didn't make it better. One of my friends said to me, everything you're doing isn't making it better. It's not getting any better. It's not even getting different.
Okay, so then in that year, because again, what this interview is to appeal to women that are you 7 years ago, or actually 9 years ago.
Now.
Yeah, so we're talking, so 9-10 years ago, when you're starting on this journey, when you're first getting introduced to things that you have no idea about, and you just instinctively go after your son in whatever way you know how.
With no fear. It's like the moms that can lift a car off their child. That's pretty much how my adrenaline ran. Okay, so then you were calling the friends, going into social media, stalking him basically, which is understandable as a parent. Right.
Your kid is he's just a child, and he's involved with all these.
Well, it's life and death.
Right.
To me, this was life and death. I had a picture I kept in my car of a casket I drew, and I kept changing the date of his death to a couple of months out. And I would remind myself, this is the outcome I'm fighting. I'm fighting for his life. And that was the codependent part of me, is to an extent creating boundaries and consequences is good. But if I'm thinking everything I'm doing is going to make him choose not to do drugs, or I'm going to save him or pull him out of it, that's not good, because then I'm as crazy as him. And I was a part of the roller coaster. I was not high, but I was doing crazier things than he was.
Okay. Yes and no. yes and no.
Felt like it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No.
I look like it.
Well, maybe to a certain degree. Okay, so then what was that rock bottom moment that first year that got him into his first rehab?
Well, I don't know if it was rock bottom or consequences. And when somebody goes to rehab with consequences, they go with a chip on their shoulder.
Right.
So that was pretty much how he went. He had been, wore out his welcome with me, and had, stayed with a couple of friends, and he was kind of like a hot potato we all passed around. And no matter how much you liked him, it was just destruction once you had him in for very long, because that's what addiction does. It destroys every atmosphere. So he called, and I hadn't talked to him for a week or so, and can you come pick me up and I'll go to treatment? So I went to pick him up, and he was supposed to meet me at my mom's. And when I got there, it was just like a cluster kind of day where nobody was there for 2 hours. We were running late to get him there. I'd left work and flew to get there. And she had taken him to a really bad neighborhood to buy some pills before he went into rehab, which now I understand a lot of times people will dose up before they go in.
Okay.
But all of this was all new stuff to me. Like even finding pill crushers and things like that, all brand new to me. So I'm sitting there fuming, thinking your grandma's involved, and you're going and doing this the day that you're committing to going to treatment. And then all the way to the treatment center, it was just the spewing and arguing. And I'm thinking, just get him there, because I'm thinking this is the finish line. Just get him to this finish line. So that was pretty much the beginning of the treatment center.
So then it wasn't that he overdosed. It wasn't that he ended up in jail. It wasn't, It was, he'd burned a bunch of bridges everywhere he goes. I'm going to see if I can analyze this or if I can guess. Okay. He's the kind of person that would come in real sweet, real nice. Hey, I need a place to crash. It's been a little rough. You think you can help me out for a couple days? Blah, blah, blah. Sure. You can stay on my couch. The minute he's in there, he's eating all your food. He's using drugs in the house. He's staying up all night. He's, bringing weird people to your house, something like that.
Well, I had really good boundaries. So it was more like he came in, I missed you. I want to work really hard. I'm into behavioral science like you now. We'll study this together and bond. And I was losing my mind for a while, but now I don't want to anymore. But while I'm here, I'll clean the house for you and do everything you need. And then things are missing. So he never really brought anybody over or did any of that eating all your food type of thing so much as he just came in, and it was this phantom that took over the home, and things would be missing. And then all of a sudden, the biggest thing would be how I would know he had relapsed or had brought it back into the home was that conflict would become insane with him. And we had never had conflict, not perpetual conflict that didn't have an end result. When you have the bottomless pit arguments that go round and round and are full of vitriol and viciousness.
Yes.
I can tell everything about a situation based on what kind of conflict goes on within it. And when the conflict is unending, dysfunctional, and vicious, I know something's wrong.
Got it. Okay. So that was his first. And how long did he last in the rehab before he got out the first time?
Well, the first time he went, it was not a long treatment program, which is one of the things I try to advocate is long-term care because it's so necessary. So he went in it was 14 days, and then they were to do the IOP And this was all brand new to me. So I'm just thinking, this is how it goes, and this is what cures it.
Right.
So he was there for 14 days, and it was a miserable experience. He was like angry at everybody the first week, and then he came around and was like the star of the treatment center. And I've seen people have kids like that since, where they're like, everybody loves him, he gets it, everybody goes to this kid for a conversation, and he's doing so well. And I would always say, I don't want you to be the student of the month in a rehab center. I want you to be the one who's doing the work, like working hardest to get well, not to be liked. But that was kind of how the first round went. And I knew his ability to charm.
Right.
I'd always said he's kind of like the type that would steal your purse and help you look for it. Yeah. So after 14 days, he came home and was going to work a program, and he relapsed that night.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The first time. But then he went back on Monday for the IOP, and I said, I think he relapsed. And he fought me. No, I didn't. And so this counselor pulled me aside and said, the harder he's fighting you and spewing at you, the more you know he's probably into it deep.
Right.
So I never forgot that, because that was part of that conflict. The harder they're spinning something on you. And I'd heard somebody say that when somebody's in active addiction, they will set fires, or even say the therapist is picking on them, or that, whatever's wrong with the treatment center, somebody's a villain. And that's how you know they're distracting you.
Correct. There's an inability. It's an inability to accept personal responsibility for anything. Mm-hmm. It's never me. It's always something else, someone else. I'm being persecuted. Yeah. You won't believe what happened. As soon as the conversation starts with, you will not believe what happened. I usually, after all these years, my first response is always, you're absolutely right. I'm not going to believe it. But that's only because I've been where you have been, because as a sponsor, which it's a lot easier to detach yourself when you're not a parent, but as a sponsor, you'll take these guys on, and then before you know it, something off, you start questioning them, and the defense mechanism goes up, and the attitude shifts, and it's like, whoa, okay, something's definitely off here. That's where the indicators should come in, where it's like, okay, this is definitely, if you're being this defensive, you're hiding something. Yeah,
and if you've got a villain, because and maybe some people have that typical personality, but my son doesn't. Yes, and if he's got a situation that he's just complaining about here and there, it's one thing. If you are gunning about somebody, that person's probably onto you, and you're trying to make them into a villain to distract from yourself.
Correct.
That's what I've had to learn, because you have to learn a whole new set of rules to the game when you're dealing with an addict.
Right. Mothers, the ones that are listening right now, listen, that was some gold. I'm going to start pointing these out as we go along.
Yeah.
But
that was a hard-fought lesson to learn, too. And that's not an easy lesson for a mom.
No, because you want to believe your kid. And you want to believe, and to a certain degree, you want some sort of answer to why. Okay, well, that makes sense. Okay, well, maybe that did happen. Or maybe that person is persecuting them. Or maybe he's just full of shit, and you're buying it. And the reality is that if they have a villain, if they're blame, if shit goes down and they have no ability to take responsibility for any of it, for zero, like none of it is their fault, right? You automatically have to assume that he's lying. There's no...
Yeah, that's what I always say. When he's active in his addiction, he was raised by czars in a draconian society with gladiators punishing him. I mean, and if we're not the villain, somebody, from the treatment center, or somebody at work, it's not just a conflict that'll blow over an annoying personality. It is a villain out to ruin every day. There is something going on behind that. It's usually we're headed to a relapse if it's not already happening.
Correct. And most of the time, you're already in a relapse, and the defensiveness is just you preparing yourself to defend yourself. That's just it. You're just constantly in a state of defensiveness, all right? Because anything that comes at you have to be prepared.
And anything can get used against you. I always say that I'm very high energy, and I talk really fast. I tend to be pretty passionate about whatever. And I like to say that I have a weight problem, which is WAIT. I have a serious weight problem, like most moms do, especially if their son's in life and death. And all of that gets spun against me, to where if I'm calling, which I don't so much now that he's a lot older, but if I'm calling and trying to check on things, or I'm showing up to, catch him doing something, I'm crazy. And it can make you look crazy because you're acting crazy, but anything like that gets used against you.
Yeah, and unfortunately, whether you push him or chase him or question him or back off completely, irregardless of any action you take, it's all on him.
Yeah, but it can all be made to look bad if it's reframed against you.
You're just adding insult to injury by chasing him down. But the reality is most of the time when parents ask me, what should I do? All right, these things are happening and, I don't know what to do. How can I help him? And unfortunately, the answer is always the same. Unless he wants to stop and unless he or she wants help, there's absolutely nothing you can do.
Right.
Other than lock your doors and stop sending him money. Period. The only thing that I would suggest doing is answering the phone in hopes that someday he's going to call you and say, I need help, but like for reals. But you can't let him in your house, roam around free. You can't buy into his bullshit, okay? And you can't go out there trying to force him to change, force him to recover, because that's never going to work.
No, it isn't. I would always tell him, you have dug this pit of misery. I'm not going to hang pictures in it for you. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to bring you comfort food. I'll give you a ladder to climb out and go to treatment, but I'm not. You have to hate your life as much as I hate your life for you to want to get well.
Right.
And I can't comfort you in it, or you're going to stay comfortable another day. And that extra day could be the day you die, the day you end up doing something to lead to jail or prison or whatever the case may be. I'm not going to help you be addicted and be on this path.
Absolutely. But again, this was a process. So he gets out of rehab, and you suspect that he's relapsed. He's going to the IOP.
He goes back in that Monday. Yep. Check back in for another 2 weeks.
Okay. And you find out later that he's been using. Mm-hmm. But how long did it take before he ended up in his next rehab?
Well, that was the permanent one. So that was about another 3 or 4 years. So we went through cycles of this where he came home, and it was a learning process for us all. He would be passed around and come home and do fine, and he is a really hard worker. So he would work sometimes 2 jobs, and that appears normal as he was, wasting away and had no money. Either he didn't get his check. They always have a reason. They shorted him on his check, or he didn't, and a corporation hasn't paid him for 3 months. Things like that would happen. And I was, of course, onto those things. So those were constant battles during that whole time. He would sometimes I try to detox him myself because, you're crazy. You just try to do whatever. So we hadn't sent him back to treatment. He would do well long enough that he'd end up at, staying with his dad, and they would handle it there, and then it would get worn out there. And it wasn't until about another good 3 or 4 years later that he put himself out in California. But by the end, that was kind of the end of the story. That was where we had just been through everything with him. And there was a few days he was staying in a car, and I would go visit him and knock on the windows and say, is this the life you wanted? And I would ask him, do you remember vacation? Do you remember going to lunch? Do you remember holidays? Because I know if you ask somebody questions and have them answer you, they realize the truth. So I wanted him to think about normal life. And he would just say, I'm fine. And I'm like, this is what you want. You can go to treatment. He wouldn't agree to it. And it went on for days. And then I would call my support system and, scream and cry and vent, and how long is this going to go on? And then before he got sick of it enough to go into treatment, a well-meaning friend took him in. And then he wore that house out. And his dad and I would send emails and, please, you're interrupting the process. We want to get him in treatment. And they would say, well, you're terrible parents. How could you not? He's not on anything. He's the nicest kid I've ever known. And then he would burn them. And it'd be hard not to, rub it in. But then he would move on to the next thing. And we went through that for a good 3 or 4 years.
Now, what was the bottom that got him to go into the long-term treatment?
Well, my mom had always taken him back in and helped him back out and kind of interrupted the process as well. And it had just gone on so long and gotten so bad. He was really down to skin and bone. You could see his teeth through his cheeks, like somebody lost all their weight like that. And he was a big football player. No light left in his eyes. And, when somebody's on opioids or prescription pills, they develop into 2 personalities, either incredibly agitated, and it's somebody's fault they're angry. It's not, they won't admit it's because they're in the cycle of using and withdrawal, and that's why they're angry, or they're too chattery and excited. So he got down to that. We were dealing with that constantly and just couldn't trust him in our home. And so finally I decided I was going to go out of town, and everybody had put him out, and he was sleeping in a dugout. And it was the dugout where he'd hit home runs and grand slams his whole life. And it was just horrifying. So I finally said, I cannot do this with you anymore. I just can't do it. Even though, I'm thinking I'm this like sharp-tongued Aaron Brockovich, non-enabling person that's guiding you toward, the intervention way of getting free of this. It's not ending, and I can't die with you like this. I'm dying with you. I'm crazy. I'm going down this path with you, and I just can't. So I went out of town when I knew he was staying in that dugout. It was so painful, and it was like not 2 or 3 days. He had whatever money he had left, packed what clothes he had left, and booked the flight. He was, I can't remember if he was on my insurance or his dad's at the time still, but he flew himself out to California and into a treatment center, and he's been out there ever since.
So he checked himself into a treatment center, and how long was he in the treatment center?
Well, first he was in a really nice luxury one, and I was thinking, this is not consequences. We're all in the wake of your Hurricane El Nino here, and like you're getting acupuncture, meeting celebrities and stuff. So I was irritated by that. But then I was like, well, he's not here, we're not dealing with it or whatever, and maybe it'll come around. But I was still pretty angry. There was no sorries or how are you? We all just were left with nothing. But after about a couple of weeks out there, he had relapsed because he charmed somebody at that rehab center. She was a counselor and kind of took on this mom role, and she was giving him money and said she had worked there for like 18 years. Somehow he had charmed her, and it was the first time. So,
Jesus.
So I was really frustrated. So we were due to fly out. I think we were a week out to fly, and he sends me a text, and there was a time change. So I wake up to a text that says, I don't have my phone. You're not going to be able to reach me. It was just really obscure text. So I had called trying to track him down at that rehab center. Nobody knew where he was. And finally, a man from SOBA called me and said, Scotty's with us. And I had just had it by then. Because I was like, he charms everybody. Families have taken him in and it's called us terrible parents and, accused us of being at fault. And then they finally see, and nobody's ever going to know how to handle him. It's a waste of time to even be out there. So he had said, so you're telling me he's, athletic and talented and charming, great manners, but I can believe nothing he says. And I was like, you feel bad as a mom, but I really had it. So I said, yeah, pretty much. And he said, great, I've got 60 more just like him. He's in the right place. I know exactly how to handle it. I really felt for the first time. Actually, he was 22 at the time, and he was a couple months away from his birthday. And I really, for the first time, told myself he's going to live to see 23 because I wasn't sure before every birthday that he'd live to the next one. And I really felt like I could take my first full breaths in a long time when he said that, because I knew, okay, now my hands are off, even though they should have been. It wasn't kind of trusting in faith to work it out. You still think you're kind of the savior, but now that they knew what they were dealing with and he would be more accountable, that was when relief finally came.
And how long was he in there?
He was in SOBA for about a year and then became an employee, and now he lives in the sober living version and works out of there.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, much better.
Yes, that is a very Hollywood happy ending story.
It feels like it. I like recovery a lot better.
Yeah, no question about it. So when did you start your own journey in Nar-Anon?
When I realized that he was out there and I was still kind of post-traumatic stress, because it does take a long time to unwind and not get triggered into, your typical old responses or fears. So I started realizing, just because his behavior was more problematic doesn't mean you get sick with your addict. So I started realizing I'm still like crazy, or, calling him and checking on him, and he's in his 20s now and he's doing fine. Or sometimes he would be working, and if I couldn't reach him, I'm immediately thinking he's either been robbed or he has, slipped back into this behavior, and he's in jail and he's across the country from me now. So I have to panic and make a fool out of myself. So I would call the treatment. I mean, it's just embarrassing, but I would call the treatment center and track him down and then send him all kinds of messages. And then he'd be furious, of course, and insulted. So we went through a couple of those cycles. They are psycho. When I realized I really just got to start taking care of me now.
Beautiful. Well, now that we finally have all the pieces together here and we have a good understanding of what happened in the course of those 6 years, you wrote this book. Yeah. And this book is your journey of learning how to cope as a mother of a drug-addicted child. Right. Correct? Yeah. So you had to learn how to set boundaries, how you had to find resources. So tell us about some of the aspects of this book that can help our moms out. Obviously, we'll recommend your book at the end of the show, but give us some suggestions as to, how to handle our children when we're in the same predicament you were 9 years ago.
Well, I don't think anyone's going to get great at it. I don't know that you ever get to an expert level, but you can get better. And the healthier you get, the healthier the situation is kind of forced to get. So a lot of the book is just the entire journey from beginning to end of getting better and what resources I started to find. And I put definitions through every chapter and kind of encouragement quotes and then signs of addiction and things like that and websites to pull. Like I was pretty specific with Google. I would, how do I know I'm being lied to? What are the signs of opiate relapse? Am I crazy or am I reacting to crazy or am I going to go crazy because I am reacting to so much crazy? So all of that is kind of detailed throughout the entire journey in order in the book. It's kind of a guidebook of what I did and beginning to end.
And what kind of boundaries would you say are essential, especially early on?
Well, I definitely have a support system that you can call and that's knowledgeable so that you can turn to somebody for advice and counsel or get an R&on and a sponsor because they'll help you with that. That's a learning process too. And it takes a while because it is your child and it's counterintuitive to say, get out or no, you can't come back or no, you can't even come to dinner because I know you're not coming to dinner. You're coming to see what's in, if there's a laptop available or something and we can't do this or, you're going to be conflict. So it's basically, I had to learn it was as needed. Sometimes it was a no access boundary or sometimes it was, you have access to me, but it's going to have to be at a restaurant. Or sometimes, you can stay a couple of days, but you really just kind of have to do where you're at. I couldn't have anybody tell me when to put him out because I wasn't sometimes emotionally ready to put him out. I had to get to that point. If somebody would say, well, he should just be out on the street in tough love, maybe I wasn't at that point yet. I had to find that for myself. And that's a learning process too.
And what would you say were some of the most important learning or were some of the most enlightening moments in your own journey? Like what did you feel helped you the most as you were going along in your learning process?
I'm learning that I'm powerless, that I can always come back to that point because chasing after it, just realizing that I can step back and I'm powerless. There's really nothing I can do. That was really enlightening because I really honestly thought I could force it. And even when I had started writing this book and he made it to California, I thought our story was going to be the story of this kid that was injured and became dependent and got well because I was like this Aaron Brockovich non-enabling mom. But then when he relapsed out there, I was almost as shocked as when I found out he was first using in the first place because it was almost a betrayal. Like how could that have been? And then you always think, well, if you can get them out of state or get them far away, but really, I have a quote in the book that says, wherever you go, there you are, because he relapsed across the country. So he took himself with him. He took the disease with him. So you're going to find it out there. And I had to really learn I can only do so much. And then I got to step back to myself and I'm powerless.
What is your opinion on tough love?
I call it smart love because tough love doesn't always work. Because I thought I swing to the other end with that pendulum, having my mom be kind of his enabler and who hid all of his secrets for him and stuff and babied all of that. I thought I had to take the exact opposite approach. So that didn't always work. I was still powerless, even though I had that tough approach. I mean, I did those tough things. And I remember sitting in a rocking chair that I had rocked him in when he was a baby and watching him, walk down the driveway and leave and just wanting to die. Every cell in my body went hot and cold. And I'm thinking, I'll just go out and get him and bring him in sick. And I don't care what happens in the house. But then I know that if I don't put him out and leave him out, it's just going to be another day he doesn't get miserable enough to want to get well. So, you don't really know what works until you all start working a program of recovery.
So that does sound a little bit like tough love. Yeah. How do you categorize the difference between the smart love and the tough love?
Well, because sometimes you don't have to be vicious. You know what I mean? Sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes I would get vicious. So, in the beginning, I thought it was moral or intelligence. And I would say, how can you be so stupid? I didn't raise you to be stupid. Why would you do this again? It's just stupid. So that to me kind of represented tough love too, that hard knocks approach.
Okay, that does make sense because it's called detaching with love. You do it in a compassionate way where it's like, I'd love to help you, but I can't.
Right.
And I've got to let you go. You can't stay here.
Not like you're the worst.
Unless, right, exactly. Instead of compounding insult with injury, you take the approach of, and this is another, let's benchmark this as another moment in the interview. This is such a tough topic when it comes to being a parent. What is too much? What is too little? What is tough love? And what in this case is smart love? And just having a channel of communication where you're being very clear as to where your boundaries are without being this wicked witch, so to speak.
Right.
Okay, so that's a great point in the sense of you can get your point across without letting your emotions and your feelings get the best of you.
And without talking him down up one side and down the other and making sure he knows every bit of shameful part of this.
Of course. So then in that case, one of the questions I like to ask is, do you have any favorite books that you would recommend to in this case, it would be our parents or our loved ones that are listening out there and have an addict that's suffering. So tell us about your book and tell us some other resources that they can go to that have helped you out.
I love the SESH book, which I bought from Nar-Anon. That's a daily story of somebody that's dealing with it. I relate to something in it, and I get something out of it every day. I look forward to that in the mornings.
It's called the what?
The SESH book, that's Sharing Experience, Strength, and Hope. It's the blue book you can get from Nar-Anon.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I get something from it every day. In fact, I always, calling him the storm or El Nino because it's their evil twin when they're basically off and running in the addiction. It's not even the same person. I study whatever adversity we're going through. So I studied the eye of the storm, and that is the calmest place within any storm. It's the calmest, quietest place. And I had read in the SESH book that this woman had said someone at a Nar-Anon meeting recommended she draw a circle around her feet. And remember, that's what you have to always come back to. You can affect and influence to a point what's outside that circle. Not to a controlling point, but to affect and influence. But you always have to come back to what's inside that circle. And that's what you have to work on, and that's all you can control. That's the eye of the storm.
Beautiful. I love it.
I love that too. That's from the SESH book. And I like Barbara Johnson, Where Does a Mother Go to Resign? What to Do When Your Child Breaks Your Heart, things like that. And she put some humor into it too, so that you can kind of, you got to have some comic relief in the midst of what I call morbid despair.
Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, your book. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, like I said, it's coming out October 25th for Kindle. You can get it on Amazon, and then it's out a few days after. And it is basically just a compilation of everything we have talked about. And hopefully it gives hope.
Yes, well, I'm sure it's a little bit more expansive than our interview.
Yeah, all the details are in there.
All the details are in there. So for more details, you're going to have to get the book, folks.
Right.
And what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
Get support and get informed. Those are the two things. Get support and get informed. That's why I kept those notebooks and I met with people. I would take people to lunch and just say, that I'd known had an experience. And they were harder to find back then. But I would go see my local pharmacist or whoever and tell me everything that I'm dealing with. So get educated, get informed. Even if you just have to spend hours on Google. Find out as much as you can about what you're dealing with so that you know how to prepare and how to deal. So you're not just blindly led by happenstance right into the crazy. And then you're not as likely to be manipulated.
Absolutely. So speaking of which, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted you were powerless over your child's drug addiction, but for the first time had developed hope that you could recover?
I would say when he relapsed out in California, because it was such a jolt and a shock. And I realized he's that far. None of my by virtue of his age and distance, none of my detective work or my protection or anything I can come up with is going to matter. And then it was kind of like, that is when I settled into, I not only am I powerless in the sense of concept, I am literally completely powerless, cut off at the knees in this situation. And that is when I started thinking, well, I'm so obsessed with his well-being, even from a distance. I can't put a plan together to fly to him every time I suspect something or follow him, in an airplane. We're across the country from each other. And that is when I started thinking, okay, I've got to deal with some of this post-traumatic stress that's coming up and being triggered. And then I started attending meetings and doing research for my own recovery, which had never even occurred to me.
Beautiful.
And then I started kind of feeling better. And then it was like, I can go to a movie and not feel like I have to keep glancing at my phone or have that sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I can have lunch with my sister or one of my friends and hear what they're saying without like just seeing their lips moving and thinking about what's going on with him. I started slowly getting better.
So what it sounds like is that you lived in this perpetual state of guilt, this perpetual state of worry, this perpetual state of fear.
Yes, torment, fear. I call it the trifecta. It's like a race running of I call it the trifecta of the AAA. You constantly feel afraid, ashamed, and alone, and that cycles over and over. There's something that triggers fear, and you feel ashamed and embarrassed and isolated, and you feel completely alone. And I wrestled those constantly.
Beautiful. I love it. So my final question to you is, if you could give our listeners, our loved ones of drug addicts, only one suggestion or multiple suggestions, actually, what would they be?
Well, I do have advice. I meet with families every week at a treatment center, and I always have the same advice. Get informed, like I said. Build a safe support team. Join a group. Find a meeting. Make sure it's safe. Not people that are going to give you the blank stare or be horrified about what you're dealing with, but find something safe. Because you always have those situations where somebody's like, oh, my son's a brain surgeon now and my daughter's a senator. How are you? And you just want to run through the wall. Make sure you put yourself in safe situations. Follow a recovery plan. I love the 3 C's that you get from Nar-Anon, where you know that you keep coming back to the fact that you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. And those things can repeat. I come back to that word, I can't cause it. Not only do I feel like I didn't cause it from his beginning use, but if he was going to relapse, my conversations with him, sometimes he would say, don't put pressure on me or stress me out. And then I'd have to feel like I was tiptoeing around him. But then I would think, there's a lot of people that live down the street from a drug dealer and stress isn't making them go use again. So I can't look at it like I have to be terrified I'm going to cause you to relapse. So you have to come back to that or you're going to go nuts. You didn't cause it. You can't control it and you will never cure it. And then my final thing I always say to families is that to remember as long as there's breath, there is hope. And then I even have something to say for somebody not in the struggle. Be kind, because you don't know the despair somebody might be going through when you meet them on the avenues of life. I end the book on that. I say, you never know what despair someone is burdened with as you encounter them on the mundane avenues of daily life. So show kindness, always, because to quote Ram Dass, we are all just walking each other home.
Oh, wow. That is beautiful. What a way to close. I love it.
Thank you.
Strong close there, Annie.
Thanks. Slam that door.
Do you have a website or social media or ways that our listeners can get in touch with you?
I'm sure. I haven't started the author page yet because that comes out when the book does. But I do have a Facebook page. It's still kind of small and humble, but we do updates and articles and updates about the books. And it does get kind of a lot of attention. It hasn't grown yet. And that's Unhooked. And I think it's under Annie Unhooked at Facebook.com. And I can send you the link. And then anybody's welcome to email me at AnnieUnhooked@gmail.
Beautiful.
And the cover of the book is red. It says Unhooked. It's got a little roller coaster squiggle, but it's got the 2 pink boxing gloves. So that's how you can always find it. The red cover with the pink boxing gloves.
I will have this listed on the show notes, folks. So make sure you go to the website and there will be a link to the Facebook page and also to the book.
Perfect.
Excellent. All right. We have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact